And I see people making uncanny comparisons with Paul Kagame, my good friend Ibrahim Traore. And I say, some of these folks are operating in a slightly different environment, where their word is obeyed instantly, without question. It's a different environment. You say, this guy is not doing things. Traore is doing them. Traore wakes up, dreams them up. Following morning, he makes a pronouncement. It is law. It is policy. Action follows. And I wake up and I say stuff, they look at me and say, what is this? What is this man talking about? We need to take it through this stage and that stage and put it to tender, float the tender. It takes 2 years, then we evaluate, then there are complaints, and there's an interdict. We wait another 4 years. By that time, you have to go and account to the people, and they remove you. Those who came before me did not fail because they didn't have ideas. They did. Maybe even better ideas. They just didn't implement them. Why? Because perhaps they failed to appreciate that the structures that are in place are not properly suited to the attainment of quick action. So you need to subvert some of these rules and processes unapologetically. And I will do it.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a close look at some really thought-provoking shifts happening. It's about how democracy is viewed in parts of Africa.
Yeah, we've gathered recent discussions, mostly from online sources like YouTube, featuring voices that are, let's say, challenging that standard Western democratic model.
Exactly. So think of this as your quick way to get up to speed. What are the core arguments? Who are the key figures pushing this change in rhetoric?
And importantly, what are the sort of underlying forces at play here? What are the potential implications?
So your mission, if you like, is to really grasp these challenges to current democratic structures, understand the leaders involved, and identify the drivers.
It's becoming quite significant, this growing wave of commentary, and you have leaders now openly questioning if the Western model is the only way or even the best way for their nations.
We'll be digging into discussions around Botswana's President Duma Boko, Captain Ibrahim Traore from Burkina Faso.
And also bringing in perspectives from people like Pilo Lumumba.
This is not the time for cowards who die times without number. Because if you are a coward today, your children and children's children will pay the price of our cowardice. We must speak out and bear the consequences. Yes, right now, you can see what they are trying to do to eliminate my good friend Ibrahim Traore. Survived many assassination attempts. Because when you are doing good, they'll take you out. It is Samora Moises Machel who once said, when you hear the former colonizers saying you are good, you must pause and ask yourself, what evil are you committing against your people?
DJ Bokiali, maybe touching on examples like Paul Kagame in Rwanda and the historical shadow of Thomas Sankara.
Right. So the goal is understanding why the dissatisfaction, what alternatives are being put forward or even demonstrated.
And, what's the bigger picture if these views keep gaining traction? It's a real debate now. Is democracy, as it operates in many African countries, actually delivering progress?
That really hits the nail on the head. Have these Western systems, adopted often around independence, truly delivered on prosperity and, crucially, genuine sovereignty?
The perspectives we're looking at suggest, well, a rising tide of skepticism, definitely.
And I see people making uncanny comparisons with Paul Kagame, my good friend Ibrahim Traore. And I say, some of these folks are operating in a slightly different environment, where their word is obeyed instantly, without question. It's a different environment. You say, this guy is not doing things. Traore is doing them. Traore wakes up, dreams them up. Following morning, he makes a pronouncement. It is law. It is policy. Action follows. And I wake up and I say stuff, they look at me and say, what is this man talking about? We need to take it through this stage and that stage and put it to tender, float the tender. It takes 2 years, then we evaluate, then there are complaints, and there's an interdict. We wait another 4 years. By that time, you have to go and account to the people, and they remove you. Those who came before me did not fail because they didn't have ideas. They did. Maybe even better ideas. They just didn't implement them. Why? Because perhaps they failed to appreciate that the structures that are in place are not properly suited to the attainment of quick action. So you need to subvert some of these rules and processes unapologetically. And I will do it.
From this shocking and unexpected speech, it is clear now that Botswana's newly elected president, Duma Boko, has ignited a firestorm with a speech that challenges the sacred cow of democracy itself. Speaking with unapologetic candour, Boko has joined Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, in declaring that democracy, far from being Africa's salvation, is a shackle delaying progress. His words, delivered with the conviction of a man who has seen the system's underbelly, have stunned observers, sparked fierce debate, and raised a critical question. Is Africa's obsession with Western-style democracy a trap set by neocolonial powers to keep the continent subdued? As a Pan-Africanist journalist, I assert that Boko's comments, inspired by Traoré's unyielding revolutionary vision, mark a turning point, a clarion call for African leaders to break free from the chains of a system that has enriched puppets while impoverishing the masses. Boko's remarks come hot on the heels of equally incendiary comments from Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, who has become a symbol of defiance against Western hegemony in Africa. Just weeks ago, Traoré addressed his people in a televised speech, unequivocally rejecting democracy as a pathway to development. "We are not in a democracy, we are in a revolution," Traoré proclaimed. "If we have to say it loud and clear here, we are not in a democracy, we are in a popular progressive revolution." Everyone needs to understand this. It's even more surprising that those who are supposed to be intellectuals, who have been to school, can imagine that a country can develop in democracy. That's false. It's not possible to name a single country that has developed in democracy. Democracy is only the end result. We must necessarily go through a revolution, and we are indeed in a revolution. Traoré's words, delivered with the fiery conviction of a man who has expelled French troops from his soil and nationalised key industries, have struck a chord with a generation of Africans weary of Western-backed puppet regimes and the hollow promises of liberal democracy. His assertion that democracy leads to a society of disorder, and his insistence that Burkina Faso is on a revolutionary path, have found an unexpected ally in Duma Boko, whose own critique of democracy's delays has raised eyebrows and sparked intense speculation. Has Traoré's unapologetic stance opened Boko's eyes to the limitations of the system he once championed? Or is Boko, a seasoned lawyer and opposition leader, simply articulating a truth that has long simmered beneath the surface of African political discourse? To understand the gravity of Boko's and Traoré's positions, we must first confront the uncomfortable reality of democracy in Africa, a system often lauded as the pinnacle of governance, but which, in practice, has served as a Trojan horse for Western interests. Since the wave of independence movements in the 1960s, African nations have been coerced into adopting democratic frameworks modelled on Western liberal ideals, often under the guise of good governance. Yet, these systems have consistently failed to deliver the prosperity and sovereignty promised. Instead, they have entrenched a cycle of dependency, corruption, and underdevelopment, with African leaders beholden to foreign powers and multinational corporations. The democratic process, with its endless checks and balances, tenders, and consultations, has become a straitjacket for African progress. In countries like Botswana, hailed as a democratic success story, the reality is far more complex. Despite its relative stability and diamond wealth, Botswana grapples with high unemployment, stark inequality, and an over-reliance on a single commodity, diamonds, controlled by multinational giant De Beers. The bureaucratic red tape that Boko so vividly described ensures that transformative policies are bogged down in years of deliberation, leaving citizens frustrated and leaders powerless to enact meaningful change. This is no accident. The West, through institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, World Bank, and various NGOs, has weaponized democracy to maintain control over Africa's resources and political direction. By promoting a one-size-fits-all model of governance, they ensure that African leaders remain entangled in processes that prioritize foreign interests over national development. Elections, often manipulated through funding and media influence, serve as a mechanism to install compliant leaders, puppets who parrot democratic rhetoric while siphoning wealth to Western capitals. The result is a continent rich in resources but poor in outcomes, where the democratic facade masks a neocolonial reality. Consider the case of Nigeria, where democratic elections have produced leaders who oversee rampant corruption and economic stagnation, while multinational oil companies plunder the Niger Delta. Or Kenya, where electoral politics have fueled ethnic divisions and entrenched a political elite that serves foreign interests over the common good. In these and countless other examples, democracy has not been a tool for liberation, but a chain that binds Africa to its exploiters. The West's insistence on democracy as the only legitimate form of governance is not about empowering Africans, but about ensuring that the continent remains a pliable playground for global capitalism. In contrast, leaders like Paul Kagame of Rwanda and Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso have demonstrated that decisive, revolutionary governance can yield tangible results, even in the face of Western criticism. Kagame, often labelled an authoritarian by Western media, has transformed Rwanda from a post-genocide wasteland into one of Africa's most dynamic economies. Since taking power in 2000, Kagame has overseen annual GDP growth averaging 7 to 8%, reduced poverty rates from 57% in 2005 to 38% in 2017, and positioned Rwanda as a hub for technology and innovation.
Okay, let's start with Duma Boko in Botswana. Now, Botswana is often held up as a pretty stable democracy in Africa, isn't it?
It generally is, yes, which makes his recent comments, highlighted in our sources, quite striking. He's openly asking if the current democratic structures actually help or hinder quick action.
Hindering the implementation of ideas, right? That's the core of it.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is his direct comparison to leaders whose word is obeyed instantly. It reveals a clear frustration.
Frustration with what, exactly?
With the checks and balances, you could say. The tender processes, the evaluations, the complaints, potential legal challenges, all things that can slow projects down, even good ones.
So it's not just slow bureaucracy, it's a fundamental question about efficiency versus democratic process.
That seems to be Boko's point, a potential mismatch between consensus-building ideals and the urgent need for development results, at least in some contexts.
And he didn't mince words. He actually said he intends to subvert some of these rules and processes unapologetically. That's pretty strong language.
Extremely strong, especially coming from the leader of a nation seen as a democratic example. And the YouTube analysis we saw, it basically puts him in the same camp as Traoré on this.
Saying democracy is a shackle delaying progress.
Right, and connecting that, there was this Pan-Africanist journalist who called Boko's comments a potential turning point.
A turning point against seeing Western democracy as the default, seeing it as a trap even.
That's the framing. The idea that it might actually hinder Africa's advancement. It's a potent narrative that seems to be gaining ground.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit. Let's look at Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso.
Capitaine Ibrahim Traoré, président du Faso.
moment that will be etched in the annals of African history, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, has once again asserted his unmatched influence across the continent, this time without even setting foot in Gabon. The recent inauguration of Gabon's new president, General Brice Clotaire Oligui Nguema, who rose to power after ousting the long-ruling Bongo dynasty, was a grand affair attended by a constellation of African heads of state. Yet, it was the mere mention of Captain Traoré's name that ignited a firestorm of cheers, leaving the attending leaders stunned, embarrassed, and overshadowed by a man who wasn't even present. This electrifying episode, coupled with Traoré's commanding presence at Ghana's presidential inauguration earlier this year, and the continent-wide protests in his defense against imperialist slander, underscores one undeniable truth. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just a leader, he is a movement, a symbol of African sovereignty, and a relentless challenge to the status quo. But then the announcer began, Captain Ibrahim Traoré's representative. Before the sentence could even conclude, the stadium erupted. For over a minute, the crowd's roar was deafening. Chants of "Traoré, Traoré" reverberated through the arena, drowning out all else. The energy was electric. A spontaneous outpouring of admiration for a man who had chosen to send his prime minister up in his stead. The other leaders, accustomed to the spotlight, were left visibly uncomfortable, their polite smiles masking the sting of being upstaged. Sources close to the event reported that some presidents exchanged awkward glances, while others stared straight ahead, their silence betraying their unease. The people of Gabon had hoped to see Traoré in person. Social media posts in the lead-up to the inauguration buzzed with excitement, with Gabonese youth expressing their desire to witness the young captain's charisma firsthand. "We wanted IB to come himself," said Marie-Claire Ayang, a 24-year-old student in Libreville. "He's the only leader who speaks for us, who fights for Africa's soul." Traoré's decision to send a representative was strategic, some analysts suggest, signalling his focus on Burkina Faso's internal challenges while still commanding influence abroad. But the crowd's reaction made one thing clear: Traoré's absence only amplified his presence. Imagine, for a moment, if Traoré had attended. The scenes in Libreville could have rivaled a rock star's concert. The fact that his mere name sparked such fervour is a testament to his cult-like following across Africa. A following that leaves traditional leaders scrambling to understand the source of his magnetic appeal. This was no isolated incident. It was a repeat of a pattern that has humiliated Africa's political elite time and again, most notably in Ghana just weeks earlier. On January 7th, 2025, Captain Traoré physically attended the inauguration of Ghana's newly elected president, John Mahama, in Accra. The event was a high-profile gathering with 17 African heads of state present, including heavyweights like South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa and Ethiopia's Abiy Ahmed. The ceremony was meant to celebrate Ghana's democratic transition, but it was Traoré who became the unintended centerpiece. As each leader was...
His position is even more, well, radical, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. He's not talking about reforming democracy. He flat out states, Burkina Faso is not in a democracy, we are in a popular progressive revolution.
That's a whole different ballgame.
It is. His claim that development within democracy is false or not possible, that's a direct challenge to decades of conventional thinking.
And his view that democracy is only the end result after a revolution.
It suggests a fundamental break with the Western approach, which usually puts democratization first as a kind of foundation for development. Traoré seems to be flipping that script.
And his actions back this up, don't they? Kicking out French troops, moving to nationalize key industries like gold mining.
Definitely. These aren't the moves of someone playing by the established Western rulebook. It signals defiance.
It's interesting how his critique echoes Boko's concerns about delays, though, even if their proposed solutions are different.
There's a parallel, yes. Both expressing this impatience, this dissatisfaction with the perceived slowness or inefficiency of the current systems.
Which brings us neatly to the wider critique of Western-style democracy in Africa that runs through our sources. The core argument seems to be these systems just haven't delivered.
Haven't delivered on the promises of prosperity and real sovereignty made back around independence. That's the claim.
And this idea of democracy being a Trojan horse for Western interests keeps cropping up. What's behind that?
Well, the argument goes that these systems, perhaps unintentionally, ended up entrenching dependency. They might have facilitated corruption or kept nations reliant on external powers, hindering genuine self-directed development.
And institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, even some NGOs get pulled into this critique.
Yes, they're sometimes portrayed as pushing a one-size-fits-all democratic model that might not actually fit the diverse realities on the ground in different African nations.
There's also this feeling that elections themselves can be, well, manipulated.
Exactly. That external influence or funding can sometimes lead to leaders being installed who are maybe more compliant with outside interests than their own people's needs. The term puppets comes up.
And the sources point to specific examples, right? Like Nigeria.
Nigeria, yes, struggling with corruption, stagnation despite oil wealth. Or Kenya, where electoral politics are sometimes seen as deepening ethnic divides or favoring elites with foreign ties.
So the conclusion drawn on these viewpoints is pretty stark. Democracy, in this interpretation, becomes a chain that binds Africa to its exploiters.
It's a powerful image. And it's crucial to understand this critique isn't always a rejection of self-governance itself, but often a rejection of this specific model and its outcomes in Africa.
Which naturally leads to looking at alternative models, or at least leaders taking different paths.
Right, like Paul Kagame in Rwanda.
Rwanda comes up a lot as an example of, well, decisive governance leading to results. Economic growth, stability.
Impressive results, yes. High GDP growth, poverty reduction, becoming a tech hub. The argument is that Kagame's approach prioritizes action, getting things done, sometimes by bypassing those lengthy debates or bureaucratic hurdles.
A more centralized approach delivering tangible improvements in health, education, infrastructure.
That's the narrative from supporters, yeah.
And then there's Traoré again, in Burkina Faso, portrayed as actively reclaiming the nation's destiny.
Reducing French influence, prioritizing self-reliance, gold refining, investing in agriculture. These are seen as concrete steps.
Echoing Thomas Sankar's philosophy from decades ago.
Very much so. That focus on self-sufficiency. Traoré explicitly frames his rejection of Western democracy as rejecting neocolonial control.
Can you unpack neocolonialism a bit here?
Sure. It's the idea that even after formal independence, former colonial powers or other external forces maintain significant economic and political leverage, often indirectly, through debt, trade terms, political pressure.
I see. So Traoré's message is about breaking free from that perceived control.
Precisely. And that message of self-reliance, it seems to resonate very strongly, especially with younger Africans. They see him as someone actually challenging the status quo.
Okay, let's bring in PLO Lumumba's perspective now.
On the critical question of leadership in Africa and the critical question of followership in Africa.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is African Black Seed. I said, this is African Black Seed, bringing you the revolutionary news shaking the entire continent.
In a world starved of truth, courage, and conviction, there are rare moments when a speech doesn't just echo through walls, but through history itself. This is that moment. It was a high-level summit in Ouagadougou. Leaders, generals, youth leaders, and thinkers gathered to shape the future of Africa. Among them stood a soldier of vision, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. And walking to the microphone came a man whose voice has thundered for African dignity for decades, Professor PLO Lumumba. My brothers and sisters, we are not gathered here as puppets of former empires. We are here as descendants of Nkrumah, Sankara, Lumumba, and Cabral. We are here because we are tired of kneeling before those who bled us dry. They called our gold foreign reserves. They took our uranium and sold us weapons. They made our mothers beg at the IMF while they stole our father's land. But today, we say enough. With every word, Lumumba cut deep into centuries of betrayal. Yet his voice was not of anger alone, but of vision, of unity. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, you are not just a president. You are the wound and the healer. You are the bullet that missed Sankara and the hope that he never lived to see. The spirit of our martyrs walks with you, but remember, they will only walk as long as you walk with the people. To every African youth in Accra, in Nairobi, in Johannesburg, in Bamako, in Atlanta, in London, in Paris, this is your time. Build our own internet. Write our own history books. Heal with our own medicine. Feed with our own hands. Defend with our own army. And speak only one language, Africa first.
We looked at a speech he gave. He seems to provide a broader, more historical context.
Yes, he does. Speaking at a summit in Ouagadougou, he really hammered home the need for freedom from these old imperial legacies, rejecting any kind of subservience.
Describing Africa as, what was it, punching below her weight?
Yeah, a continent divided by artificial borders, full of potential, but not achieving it. He used Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities to capture the contradictions of progress alongside huge challenges.
And he voiced disappointment with post-independence leaders.
Deep disappointment. That feeling that the promises of liberation weren't fulfilled, leading to the sentiment among the youth that it was better while we waited for independence. It's quite a statement.
That leads to his point about the deficit of leadership.
Referencing Chinua Achebe's famous line about Nigeria, that the trouble is simply a failure of leadership. Lumumba extends that, pointing to how much of Africa's economies are still controlled by people from other civilizations.
Raising questions about real economic independence.
Right. And he brings in John Henrik Clarke's idea, too, that many newly independent nations just mimic their former colonizers' leadership styles.
Which Clarke argued was a recipe for, well, not succeeding.
Exactly. Lumumba ties all this history to the instability we see now, Niger, Mali, Chad, etc., suggesting these leadership issues are still playing out.
Contrasting it with past leaders like Nkrumah, Nyerere,
who he holds up as models of selfless service, dedicated to the continent. And he ends with a call to action, really, for the next generation to pick up that baton of liberation.
It's fascinating, then, to look at someone like Traoré, who seems to embody that call for some. The sources highlighted his popularity.
They did. The reactions mentioned, like at the Gabon inauguration, huge cheers just for his name, even though he wasn't there. Or in Ghana, overshadowing other leaders.
It suggests he's become a powerful symbol for many people.
Absolutely. That his name alone sparks such enthusiasm indicates a deep connection with his message of defiance and self-determination.
And it's not just cheering, is it? There was that incident with the U.S. AFRICOM general.
Right. General Langley accusing Traoré of misusing gold reserves. The reaction was massive protests across the continent defending Traoré.
Seen as rejecting perceived external interference.
That's how it was interpreted in the sources, yes. A strong backing for Traoré against what was seen as an attempt.
When they start branding Traoré as a criminal because he's stealing the gold of his people of Burkina Faso to protect himself, then slowly they're achieving two things: building a narrative that this government is illegitimate, but also, and more sinister, more lethal, what they're also doing is to begin to lay the groundwork of taking action. But also another trick that they're now using in this divide and rule is by using black people. We embrace Michael Langley as a son of Africa. We embrace Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, as a daughter of Africa. But we are telling them that we must now stop allowing these people to use the black man and the black woman to do their dirty work. For example, in the case of General Michael Langley, he is the leader of the US Africa Command. And as the leader of the US Africa Command, he had a chance to renegotiate America's relationship with Africa militarily, but it is impossible because the American systems cannot allow that.
To undermine him.
DJ Bukiali's analysis framed Traoré as representing an uprising against neocolonialism.
And argued that Western opposition stems directly from Traoré challenging their influence in the region. You have to remember the historical context, too, alleged past instances of external powers backing coups in Africa.
Which makes Burkina Faso's move to establish its own national gold reserves seem even more significant.
It's a tangible step towards that self-reliance goal, seen as a direct challenge to the existing financial system where reserves are often held externally.
And there's a strong Pan-African sentiment behind all this, supporting Traoré and the Alliance of Sahel States, AES.
Undeniably, a growing call for African unity, the idea that collective action is needed to resist external pressures and achieve real self-reliance.
Our sources kept mentioning the role of youth, inspired by Traoré, and even ideas like referendums on Pan-African issues.
Yeah, like a common currency, letting the people decide. It speaks to this desire for more direct, continent-wide collaboration.
And the potential impact of, say, a strong Sahelian currency backed by gold.
It's discussed as a long-term possibility, a way to potentially challenge the dominance of the US dollar in trade and finance for the region. Given Burkina Faso's gold reserves, it's seen as a potential tool for economic empowerment.
The sources also noted the criticism these kinds of leaders face, but stressed the importance of focusing on their domestic support.
Right, and things like Traoré's military attire, his focus on internal security, they're presented as symbols of his immediate priorities for Burkina Faso.
He also apparently expressed gratitude for global support against imperialism.
Reinforcing his alignment with that broader movement, yes.
And it's not just Traoré, is it? The sources mention other leaders taking similar stances. President Samia in Tanzania.
Yes, her reported ban on use.
The US dollar is now starting to be banned in certain countries. Now this means in these specific countries, you cannot use US dollars anymore. They will look at that currency and it is not a valid currency. It will be the equivalent of trying to buy things with monopoly money. And they say the reason they're doing this is because they'd like to break away from the US dollar and have their own currency more valuable.
In a seismic shift that has sent shockwaves through the corridors of global power, Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan has taken a courageous and revolutionary step, banning the use of the US dollar and other foreign currencies for domestic transactions effective July 1st, 2024. This audacious move places her firmly in the ranks of Africa's boldest and most visionary leaders, alongside Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traoré and Namibia's newly inaugurated President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah. Together, these three lions of African sovereignty are rewriting the continent's economic and political narrative, striking a resounding blow against the shackles of neocolonialism and Western economic hegemony. Their actions signal a new era of African self-determination, one that prioritizes the dignity and prosperity of their people over the interests of foreign powers. President Samia Suluhu Hassan's decision to ban the US dollar in domestic transactions is nothing short of a declaration of economic independence. By mandating the use of the Tanzanian shilling, TZS, for all local commerce, her administration aims to dismantle the corrosive effects of dollarization, which has long undermined Tanzania's monetary sovereignty. Dollarization, a legacy of Western economic dominance, has weakened local currencies across Africa, eroded confidence in national economies and fueled inflation and dependency on foreign financial systems. By outlawing this practice, Samia is reclaiming control over Tanzania's economic destiny, ensuring that the wealth generated within its borders circulates in its own currency, strengthening local markets and empowering Tanzanian businesses and citizens. This policy is a direct challenge to the United States and its economic stranglehold on the global South. While these sentiments reflect the growing Pan-Africanist fervor, the reality is even more profound. By prioritizing the Tanzanian shilling, Samia is not only bolstering her nation's economy, but also sending a clear message to the world. Africa will no longer be a playground for Western financial manipulation.
Using the US dollar domestically was cited as a move against what's termed financial imperialism.
And Nandi-Ndaitwah in Namibia.
Restructuring the oil ministry for national benefit, demanding reparations from Germany, changing visa rules requiring them for Americans, pushing for visa-free travel for Africans.
These are all seen as moves asserting sovereignty and Pan-Africanism.
Exactly. Presented as part of a growing trend of leaders pushing back against traditional Western dominance and prioritizing continental links.
It all seems to feed into that bigger, long-standing vision of a united Africa, and the idea of a single currency keeps coming back.
It does. Seen as potentially a very powerful tool, a way to rival the dollar and euro, maybe dismantle those neocolonial economic structures, and foster genuine economic independence across the continent.
Traoré's calls for unity are framed as strategically vital, then, to counter external manipulation.
Yes, the argument is that a unified Africa, leveraging its immense resources collectively, could negotiate with global powers on much more equal terms.
Reclaiming a kind of economic sovereignty that existed before colonialism.
That historical context is often invoked, yes, looking back to pre-colonial currencies and economic systems as inspiration for regaining control.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, We've really explored a significant challenge emerging against the Western democratic model, at least in some African contexts.
Yeah, the core concerns we saw in the sources focus on its perceived limits. Limits on delivering rapid development, limits on achieving true national sovereignty.
And we've highlighted these contrasting approaches, leaders like Traoré, like Kagame, prioritizing decisive action, self-reliance.
And the significant popular support these approaches seem to be gathering, which is a key factor here. It's resonating with people on the ground.
We've all
Guys, this whole thing of democracy is a smokescreen of lies. Because even in countries where they are claiming democracy, they are enjoying more freedom in Africa than we can enjoy in their own country. And I don't know why we are so much scared of dealing with the devil once and for all. And you tell this message to all my white brothers from Germany and from South Africa. If you are not careful the way you handle land, you are going to leave your children with a snake in the back. Wow, wow. Translate your information into your passion, into your action plan. What I'm challenging SWAPO to do, stop correcting full stops and commas. Look for your hands and implement what you have said you are going to implement. And I will say this, and I will not spare you. I'm not coming in as a technocrat. I'm a technocrat in terms of being an intellectual harasser and social maverick who upsets systems. There I'm a professional. I will harass you and you will not sleep for 16 weeks in a row. And I would want you, as we are concluding, to live here uncomfortable. And I'm doing this deliberately so that you can have an action plan. That let us go out there and let us do something about it. I love what my brother said. SWAPO did not go to war to fight for democracy. Let's start right there, where it's uncomfortable. You guys went to war, and you did not go to war to fight for democracy. We didn't go to war so that we wanted to share toilets. No, we can build our own toilets. We went to war because we wanted to restore land, number one. We wanted power away from those that were oppressing us and to have it to ourselves. And I'm not talking about SWAPO alone. I'm talking this as a Pan-Africanist. This has been the weakness of all African governments, all of them. They went to war to fight for land. When they were there, they started organizing governments and they made themselves the kings while they were at war. And when they came back, they assumed the instruments of colonial power systems, and they started to become the drivers of the same system which had oppressed them.
Also really underscored the growing momentum for Pan-Africanism, for unity, for moving away from dependency on Western systems.
Which you see clearly in the support for Traoré, the formation of the Alliance of Sahel States, and these other policy moves we discussed.
So it leaves you, the listener, with a really provocative question to think about. Is this current model of democracy universally the best fit for every African nation?
Or are there perhaps alternative paths to progress? Paths that might better address the continent's very specific challenges, its unique histories, and its deep aspirations for genuine self-determination and, crucially, economic empowerment. Worth reflecting on, considering all the diverse perspectives we've touched on today.